You know, I guess one person can make a difference. Enough said.
For almost 10 years, when someone asked me what my favorite game was, it was a simple answer. Skyrim. Something about being able to play a game where I could be any kind of character I wanted felt freeing to me. For almost 10 years, no game came close to topping Skyrim. I always thought in order for a game to beat it, it would have to have a world that was even more expansive, a game that had more ways to play, more stories to tell, and push the boundaries of gaming. So, with all of that in mind, know that when I say Spider-Man for the PS4, a game where you play as a predefined character, has a map that isn't even 1/3 of Skyrim's, and told pretty much one main story, is now my favorite game without a doubt, I really mean that. But the thing is, when it first came out back in 2018, I didn't think it was my favorite game. I even put it at number 2 because, well, it didn't have all those things I listed. But these past few weeks made me realize just how much fun I get from playing this game, more so than I ever did with Skyrim. So today, I want to take a more in-depth look at this game, and talk about why I love it so much, and how it became my favorite game of all time.
I think I know that guy.
I should probably start off by saying this. Spider-Man is my favorite character. Not in Marvel or comics or superhero stories. No, Spider-Man is my favorite character in all of literature, in all of movies, in TV shows, and video games. I may have liked Skyrim more in the past, and my favorite show isn't a Spider-Man one, but when it comes to character, there is no one more compelling and interesting to me than Spider-Man. So yeah, I have a little bit of a bias. The story in this game is so much fun, and I usually don't think that about video game stories. I'll think they're cool or dramatic or epic, which this game has, don't get me wrong, but I never thought they were fun. I never thought being invested and watching every cutscene, even if I've played the game multiple times, was as fun as the gameplay. A lot of people who talk about this game will say that it's like watching a Spider-Man movie. And I agree with that. Anytime I see footage from this game, especially the cutscenes, I get really happy and just remember how good the game is. And so, I'm gonna make a statement that probably not everyone is gonna agree with. Spider-Man for the PS4 is the best Spider-Man story I've ever experienced. Better than Into the Spider-Verse, better than any of the MCU Spidey movies, better than the Raimi movies, and even better than the Spectacular Spider-Man show. It captures the essence of both Spider-Man and Peter Parker perfectly, in my opinion. I'm gonna go on a quick little side tangent about the movies. A lot of people like the Raimi movies, and I was definitely one of them, but the one thing I always felt weird about is how Peter starts being Spider-Man after he graduates high school. I like the aspect that Spidey started as a kid. It makes him feel even more like the common man and reinforces the idea that literally anyone can be Spider-Man, as well as explain why he has the childish personality when he puts on the mask. In this game, Peter is in his early 20s, but it's been established that he's been doing this for around 8 years, meaning he's started as a kid. This Spider-Man has that epicness that Tobey's did in the original trilogy, but also has that kid-like personality and charm because he started as a kid. Now, the MCU Spider-Man gets the personality a lot closer to how I imagine the character, but people say that he doesn't face any consequences, and I half agree with that statement. Tom Holland's Spider-Man does face consequences. I mean, look at the mid-credits scene in Far From Home. But the problem is that we only see the major, big-time consequences. But a big thing about Spider-Man and Peter is the little issues he faces that everyone else does as well. Whether it's relationship issues or financial problems or just having to balance both a life as Peter and as Spider-Man. This game does a fantastic job at showing that. The opening cutscene alone has so much visual storytelling and shows us what kind of life Peter's living. Before it even ends, we see that classic choice of Peter either choosing to pay his bills or Spider-Man going to take down Fisk. And of course, we know he'll always choose the latter.
SWAT is 1084 at Fisk Tower. All units stand by. Warrant is en route.
There are scenes and even missions that deal with him and his financial issues, how he gets evicted, has to find his stuff in garbage trucks, and then struggles to find a place to sleep. But I get it. Money problems aren't the only issue that's relatable. One of my favorite scenes in this game is actually a scene where Peter is just texting MJ and worried that he messed things up with the relationship. Or how about the fact that his constant need to be Spider-Man and save the city means he can't spend time at his job and be there for his boss and friend who's going through a very dark time in his life, and even causes him to turn into a supervillain. Whatever the case, this Peter and Spider-Man feel so comic accurate and what I've always pictured the perfect adaptation to be. But surprisingly enough, Peter and Spider-Man aren't the only characters in this game.
Hey, Pete.
Mary Jane Watson. This version is amazing, and my favorite adaptation of the character. I know some people didn't like how she was a reporter and wanted her to be the model and actress that she's usually known for being, but I liked her a lot. She still manages to balance that flirty, cute girl next door charm with the mindset of someone who's had to deal with Spider-Man's antics for 8 years. She's confident and independent, but not invincible. She's not a damsel in distress or just a pretty face, but she does have her weaknesses.
Hey, there's my favorite aunt.
Peter, what a nice surprise.
Aunt May is really good. Marissa Tomei had her moments in Homecoming of being worried for Peter and still feeling like someone that he was close to, and the only real family he had left. And then it was kind of wasted in Far From Home, but that's a different video. And Rosemary Harris is probably the more comic accurate Aunt May, who inspires Peter and cares for him. However, this Aunt May takes the best of both. She's shown to care for everyone, and especially Peter, while having a great and loving relationship with him. And is the reason that I cried so much at the end.
Peter Parker.
Otto and Lee's stories are amazing. Insomniac knew that we knew Otto would become Doc Ock, and knew that we knew Lee would become Mr. Negative. So instead of relying on that being a big twist moment, they focus on making them both seem like good people, and someone you can empathize with, especially Otto. So that when they do turn, it's more of a sad moment. And yeah, those are all the characters, so I guess we should move on.
Yo, Miles. Hey, fanboy.
I'm just kidding, let's talk about him real quick. Yes, Miles Morales is in this game, and while I do think that Into the Spider-Verse has the best adaptation of him, this game still did a really good job. Miles in this game is kind of the substitute for Peter in most first Spider-Man stories. He's just a kid who has an inspiring father figure that ends up getting killed, and from that, learns to do good and help others. And also gets bitten by a radioactive spider. He's really good, but my only little nitpick is that he does seem to mirror Peter a lot, which I know is how it goes in the comics, but I think Into the Spider-Verse set the bar for Miles. So I hope in the sequel, he gets more of his own personality. I think we started to see bits of that in the DLC, so that's good. I could honestly keep going on about every single character in this game, but I don't want this video to be 10 hours. Yeah, no, I don't want that. So let's quickly wrap up this section by talking about the main story. There are two halves of the story. There's the Mr. Negative half, and then there's the Doc Ock half. The Mr. Negative half is definitely more lighthearted, for the most part, and has some really fun missions that capture the more friendly neighborhood side of Spidey. Whether it's the missions with Shocker, or the stealth sections at the shipyards, or the ESU Halloween party, which is my favorite mission by the way. They're missions that, for the most part, don't really have high stakes. They're things that Spidey could be found doing on any regular day. And I love how much humor and visual storytelling there is in these missions, like this scene.
You don't think this has anything to do with Lee, do you?
Sorry to cook and run.
Did you just leave your clothes on the kitchen floor?
Where do you want me to,
Just the couch is fine.
It's really good, and one of the reasons I love watching the cutscenes. Well, that and because I can wear any suit I want and have it show up, and the fact that all the suits are so detailed and look so good. And now when we get to the Doc Ock half, pretty much the mission after Grand Central, we see the more serious, intense, and epic side of Spider-Man stories, where the city is overrun by criminals and being brought to its knees by a plague, which I know isn't new for a Spider-Man game, but still works well here. And the only one who can stop this apocalyptic situation is Spider-Man. This is the half where we get to see the Sinister Six and get really cool missions like stopping the raft inmates from escaping, or the hallucinogenic poison trip from Scorpion. If the first half was keeping the city safe, then the second half is taking the city back. This is also where the voice acting for these characters really shines. One of my favorite moments is the ending scene between Peter and Otto after the battle.
That's because men like us have a duty, a responsibility, to use our talents in the service of others. Even if they don't appreciate it, we have to do what's best for those beneath us, whether they understand it or not.
No, you're wrong! You are everything I wanted to be! You just threw it away!
All in all, the story and characters are spectacular. and I never hated watching any of the cutscenes. Still, to this day, I love and have fun watching them. Anyone who hasn't played this game, and even has a little interest in Spider-Man, I cannot recommend it enough. Or at the very least watch a walkthrough. Now a game can have a good story, but if it's not fun to play, it can start to feel like a drag. So how is the gameplay in this? It's fantastic.
Don't make me come down there, you punk.
Hey, Gary! How you doing?
Marjorie, how are you? How's your mother?
The combat is really good. It does mimic the style that the Batman Arkham games had, but I always thought that Batman having the dodge or counter ability fit more in line with Spider-Man. And unlike the Arkham games, in this game Spider-Man doesn't immediately snap to the next enemy after pressing the punch button. So when you go into a fight, your reflexes need to be fast and you need to plan your encounters and use your gadgets correctly. Speaking of gadgets, this is a part that I liked and a part that I didn't like. Now, it's not insane to think that Spider-Man would have different types of webs, especially after he's been doing this for 8 years. But while some of the gadgets like the impact web, the web bomb, and even the trip mine felt good to use, there were some, like the suspension matrix, concussion blast, spider drone, and electric web that ended up either feeling way too overpowered or only useful in certain situations. It's not that big of a deal for me since I can pretty much just not use it and still have 3 really good gadgets, but if I could change it, I'd probably take out the 4 I didn't like and have more upgrades available on the ones that are left. I just feel like at the end of the day, Spider-Man isn't like Batman or Iron Man. He isn't known for his gadgets, so having 3 different web-based gadgets are good, but having 6, while some of them not even being web-based, kind of feel like overkill. Now what about stealth? Well, in my opinion, it's just as fun as the combat. There are very few missions where it's actually required to do stealth, but if I could approach things with stealth, I almost always did. The fact that Spider-Man can move to almost anywhere and isn't limited to just like gargoyles means you can do stealth so fast, plus with things like trip mine and impact web you can speed it up even more. At the end of the day, it feels very open-ended to the way you can approach it. The only thing I would want to see is being able to stealthily web up people from the ceiling and not just from a railing. I mean, Spider-Man even does it in the Grand Central Mission when you play as MJ. That reminds me, since we're on the topic of stealth and MJ, let's talk about the parts where you don't play as Spider-Man. When you have players start out by controlling someone as powerful as Spider-Man, how do you keep the excitement and fun going by changing the character to a normal person? Well, it's tricky, and I think Insomniac did a decent job with it, but at the same time, there are some parts that they didn't execute as well in my opinion. Let's start with MJ. She has 5 stealth sections in this game. 2 of them I really like playing, but the other 3 I just kind of speed run through. The first one is arguably the worst. It takes about 1.5 to 2 minutes before the actual stealth begins and isn't really that long, nor does it have any high stakes until after you complete the stealth. The second one is better because it does have higher stakes while you're playing it, but it's still very short and very linear. The third has a more open and bigger area as well as gadgets to help you sneak around with, so the stealth can be played in a couple different ways, but still nothing groundbreaking. But it's the 4th and 5th sections I want to focus more on. The 4th MJ stealth section has to be my favorite non-Spider-Man level, mainly because it does something that I don't think any other Spider-Man game has, which is show us how normal people see Spider-Man. It's fun to crawl up walls and swing around as Spider-Man, but when you see him do it from a normal person's perspective, it feels so much more astounding. Plus, in this section, you still kind of get to control Spider-Man by having him stealth take down whoever you tell him to. It's not only a great way to show the main character in a different light, but also fun to have both Peter and MJ work together. And the 5th and final MJ section also does this really well. And while it doesn't give MJ the power to call Spider-Man whatever, what it does do is give more detail to the story and the world. We get glimpses of the spiders that Osborn is working on and will eventually go bite a certain kid, as well as the start to the Green Goblin. We get more detail on things like Harry, Martin Lee, and Octavius' stories. There's even bits of doing more detective type work in this section, and I personally like that. If you're gonna give me a non-Spider-Man level, it needs to be something more than just stealth, because you already have a way more fun stealth system with Spider-Man. For the sequel, and yes, I really hope to God they're doing one, if they're gonna have more MJ sections, then they need to have her do things that only she can do, and stuff that Spidey can't. Now I'm gonna go kind of quicker through Miles' sections, as I feel like most of what I said about MJ can be related to Miles gameplay wise. He has 3 sections. The first is short and is kind of more of a walking simulator than a stealth section, but it's good because of how intense it is and how it relates to the story. The second is my least favorite, and it's kind of like the second MJ section. It's longer and has more to do, but it's nothing great and still pretty linear. However, his third one is really good. I love the idea of taking the villains that Spider-Man fights and jokes around with, and then showing how scary they actually are when you're not Spider-Man. It's another great example of showing the player something that only can be achieved when you're not playing Spider-Man. Okay, so let's talk about playing Peter Parker. His sections, gameplay-wise, are nothing special. I think the parts where he has to solve those little puzzles were the main thing that people really disliked about the game. And do I agree? Yeah, kinda. I mean, there is an option to just skip this stuff, so at the very least, it says that the devs really weren't that confident in this part of the game, but I'd rather have them spend more time on the Spidey sections than the Peter sections. For the most part, playing Peter can be fun, but it's more because of how it relates to the story and not specifically the gameplay itself. However, one of the DLCs has a section where you play as Peter following criminals to take him back to their base of operations, and even has Peter using his powers outside of the costume. I would love to see more of that. Maybe in the sequel we could get a section where Peter has to get somewhere fast, but he doesn't have his costume, so he can only web swing through alleyways to avoid being seen. I don't know. Like I keep saying, just think of things you can only do while you're not playing Spider-Man. And yeah, that's it for the gameplay. We've covered all the major bases. There's nothing else in a Spider-Man game that I can think to talk about. Okay, yeah, I'm just kidding. Let's talk about it. The one thing that everyone was nervous about, including the devs, I think. The web swinging. When a game gets remastered, you'll probably hear this phrase. This is how I imagined the game looked when I was younger. Well, for web swinging in this, it's what I always imagined the web swinging in Spider-Man 2 felt like. Some people were upset that the web swinging wasn't fully physics-based like the Spider-Man 2 game, but I think it fits perfectly. If this version of Spider-Man had only been a hero for a few months, or even a year, then I could see his swinging being a bit more rough, but that's not the case here. He's been doing this for 8 years, so it makes sense that his swinging would be almost perfected. But even if you don't care about the story aspect, I would still say that the swinging system in this is really fun. It's a system that's designed to always keep you going. It has the elements of a physics-based system, so it's not completely automated, but simple enough that anyone can pick it up and... I'm just gonna say it. Feel like Spider-Man. It's that feeling of flying and soaring across the rooftops of Manhattan. In a way, the swinging in this game is kind of therapeutic at times. No lie, I have a save file that I have 100% of the game on, and I'll just go on there and do nothing but web swing around the city. Sometimes I'll put on music to make it feel more cinematic. Oh, wow, that sounds really nerdy now that I say it out loud. Other times I'll just put on a podcast or video and just lose myself for literal hours just swinging around. That's how much I love the web swinging in this game. So Insomniac, thank you so much for making the web swinging in this game just feel perfect. Now then, let's wrap up this review by talking about the little things.
Love seeing you two together again. You always were my favorites.
Okay, so I'm almost 8 pages into this script, so I'll try to go a little faster on this so the video doesn't run on for too long. Starting with the look of the game itself. It's very colorful. One of the first things I noticed and really made the city feel more fresh and alive. The models for the characters look really good as well, and never really hit that uncanny valley look for me. All of the side missions were really fun and seemed like something that Spider-Man would do. From stopping Tombstone selling a drug that could create chaos in the city, to helping out with the tiniest things like catching pigeons and returning them back home. They all have good writing like the main story, and for the most part really didn't feel like filler to me, even if they were. Backpacks are really awesome. I know collectibles can be seen as lame, but I really like how they had each backpack have something different in them and came with a mini backstory. It helped to expand the lore of this Spider-Man, as well as make cool references to the comics and movies.
All I did was save this kid's balloon from floating away, and he made me this. It's the little things that make it all worth it.
Taking pictures was also awesome, since you never really had to stop to take the picture. You could swing by, slow down time for a second, snap the pic, and keep on going. Also, like the backpacks, it helped expanded the lore when we got to see things like Avengers Tower, the Sanctum Sanctorum, Wakanda Embassy, and so much more.
I wonder if King T'Challa got his powers from being bitten by a radioactive panther. Dude's tough, but that'd still probably hurt.
The research stations were really cool and something I didn't expect. I love seeing Spider-Man do things to help the city that doesn't always involve him beating up criminals. There were 17 research stations, I think, and all of them had different and unique things for Spidey to do. Challenges and bases did feel the most repetitive, but I don't think it ever really got boring for me. I just saw it as like a bigger version of the crimes you do in the city, if that makes sense. And speaking of the crimes, I really like the way they flowed. All you have to do is swing to the crime and just start beating bad guys away. There's no having to talk to anyone to start the crime like in Spider-Man 2. It's just another thing that makes the city feel alive. And speaking of the city and how it feels alive, I am on a roll with these transitions. I love how you can find people just doing things of their own accord. They're not just all waiting around to see Spider-Man. I remember I just watched some random people play a basketball game and then forgot that I had to stop crime. Or I would go to a random park and see a group of people doing yoga. And when they do see Spider-Man, the way they react is really cool and adds to the feeling of being this famous superhero. Or Menace if they're a fan of Jameson. Also, I love that Insomniac included so many different suits in this game, even stuff that's from really obscure comics, as well as releasing new suits like the Raimi one and the Far From Home, all for free, no microtransactions whatsoever. God bless. And finally, I would like to address the soundtrack for this game. It's perfect. I remember listening to the main theme for this game on YouTube, and I saw a comment that said something like, "This theme's gonna be so nostalgic in the future," and I gotta agree. It's a completely new theme for Spider-Man, but I think it fits so well, and I never get tired of hearing it. It might be one of my favorite themes from Spider-Man, second only to the OG theme. And I know it's kind of a meme at this point to say, as soon as you jump in the game, the orchestral music just kicks in. But god dang it, I really love the orchestral music while swinging around. It makes me feel spectacular. I said at the beginning of the video that it was going to take a monster of a game to top Skyrim for me, and I didn't think that Spider-Man was that game at first. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized what this character represented and meant to me. It's no surprise at all that this game would become my favorite. Spider-Man is a kid who lost everything, and every time things start to go good for him, the world pushes him back down. And it's in that moment, when he's at his darkest time, and he realizes that if he stopped being Spider-Man, his life as Peter would be so much better. And yet he chooses to keep going and get back up, because that is his responsibility.